The primary purpose of Innovative AAC Solutions, the podcast, is to educate and inform. The views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute educational or medical advice. They are not necessarily the views of Special School District of St. Louis County. Guys, welcome back. It is Laura Hayes, and I'm back. We're back for another season of Innovative AAC Solutions, the podcast. This season, I can't tell you guys enough how jam-packed of resources, information, exciting guests we have coming for you. I think I say it every year, but I am just so excited. We are definitely missing Cheryl Livingston, but I'm going to try to keep on keeping on without her. The main reason that we kind of wanted to go deeper. So we've given you guys a wealth of resources in the first 3 seasons, but we're going deeper as a department, and we have targeted a prime topic for the entire season of the podcast this year. And that is namely literacy and AAC. So we get questions about this a lot. We have a few classes on this topic, but we really wanted to kind of talk to some of the experts in the field, see who's doing it well, get some conversations going, give you guys more implementation ideas and resources to get that off the ground if you're not already feeling successful. And so that's this entire season. So with that note, you guys know I love a good intro. And so last year, we did some switching of our Zoom backgrounds and gave away some prizes. This season, I thought it might be fun to incorporate some humor into the podcast. So I was able to locate some literacy jokes that we can use, whether it be just to your students or if you want your AAC user to have access to some of these, they're pretty funny. And so the first one I want to share with you is, why can't water say the whole alphabet? Why can't water say the whole alphabet? It only knows H2O. H2O. I hope you guys think that's as funny as I do because it tickles me. And so with that, you're going to notice too, we're going to have some jokes for you this season. Hopefully you'll laugh alongside us. And we're going to have some great interview guests for you guys to learn from. The first will be here just in a little bit, but you'll also notice a new format. We're actually going to be splitting up the season, and we're going to have a full interview episode. And then right back to back, we're going to have a mini episode. And that's just to kind of give you guys some longer episodes to digest information and resources, and then some short mini episodes that will have a tool and an implementation idea for you to implement in your classroom tomorrow, or share with another staff that may need some ideas. So you'll notice that this season is a little bit new. You'll notice that you'll be seeing a lot more of me for now. And we just hope you enjoy. We hope you enjoy the topics. We hope you enjoy the guests. So with that, our first guest is Sofia Benson-Goldberg, and she comes to us from UNC. And that, if you guys have been following along with some of our other episodes, you'll know that UNC is championing so much when it comes to literacy and research in the field. They're the minds behind Tar Heel Shared Reader, Tar Heel Reader, Tar Heel Gameplay, Project Core. I could go on and on. The list is endless, and you'll hear about more of these resources this season. But let's dive into our first interview and listen to what Sofia has to say. She's got really great gems in this episode. I can't wait for you to hear from her. So let's dive into our interview with Sofia Benson-Goldberg. Hey everybody, welcome back to Innovative AAC Solutions. I'm your host, Laura Hayes, and I am so excited for you guys to hear from Sofia today. She is doing some amazing things at one of our favorite places. And so we are going to throw it over to her because I'm going to let her kind of tell you a little bit about her background and her experience with AAC specific to literacy, because as you know, this is the topic that we are talking about all season long, is something near and dear to our hearts, is literacy and AAC. So without further ado, Sofia, thank you for coming on, and just can you tell everyone who you are and what your background is?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Sofia Benson-Goldberg, and my background is as a speech and language pathologist. I graduated in 2014 and from a place with an in-house clinic, and it was one of those things where it just, literally luck of the popsicle stick draw was how we chose clients, and I ended up with someone who is using AAC, and then, it builds from there. Your next supervisor's like, ooh, I can use you. And so unintentionally fell into this field and just love it. And then was working clinically in Northern Colorado at a private practice, all with children, adolescents, young adults who are using AAC. And one of the big things that struck me as I was working with a young man who was only 2 or 3 years younger than me, and it became apparent that the only difference in the educational opportunities that we both had was because I wasn't in a wheelchair, right? He had cerebral palsy and was in a wheelchair. And so we're working on being able to spell his name and could recognize all the letters, but didn't have that internal like phonological phonemic awareness. And that was a big driving force for me. Or sitting, trying to teach students alphabet knowledge, letter name, letter sounds, and going to IEP meetings and being asked why that was functional. And so, as many of us do, right, found Karen Erickson, started following her around, becoming really inspired, trying to take what I was learning at conferences and papers and applying it, and just said, I really want to come and learn everything I can from you and figure out how I can have an impact, not on the 30 kids on my caseload, but on many, many, many more students. So that's a little bit of my background.
Well, and I want to jump into your dissertation because I think it's so valuable and there's so many points to it. Like we could really just spend the entire interview on that. But you kind of talking about how, your clients inspired you and you found Karen. Was that the driving force that led you to kind of go into your doctorate, or did you always know, like, I want to kind of go that direction?
Yeah, I was raised by a professor. And so I actually spent a long time saying, no, that is not for me. I don't want that career choice. I see the stresses of that. Did a master's thesis in my master's program, even though it wasn't required. And everyone said, oh, you're going to get, and I said, no, never. um, but yeah, just knowing that who your mentor is so very important in that relationship, and meeting Karen and saying, oh, you're like, I could spend years just learning from you and thinking and working with you, did draw me back in. And seeing someone who wasn't studying in this very narrow way, one skill set, but really thinking about what can we do to support teachers? What can we do to support parents? What can we do to support clinicians so that on Monday you can, even if you're not feeling perfectly confident, you can start doing something, was really helpful because I want to make sure anything I do is applied and actually helping people.
Yes, yes. And I think that is something, it's a niche within a niche to talk about literacy and AAC, but you all at UNC, that you guys find a way to make it so meaningful for the people on the ground. And it's like, yeah, I can go do that tomorrow. And I think that is what makes the difference, is that you're not trying to send people to a periodical saying like, hey, look at this in your free time. Because we just, you've done it. We don't have a ton of free time. So it's like, how can we make this meaningful? So let's dive into your dissertation.
Okay.
If someone hasn't read it, can you kind of give like a brief overview? Because yeah, let's just start there. Let's do a brief overview of what that means.
Yeah. So the idea was trying to better understand and do an update of what are very specifically the emergent literacy opportunities that we are extending to the population of kids that the Department of Education labels as having significant cognitive disabilities. And so they're specifically that are using AAC devices and aren't yet independently symbolic communicators. And so there's been some research done in the last few years looking at single classrooms or just a few teachers within a school. And this was trying to expand that and say, okay, is what's being reported in that literature that wasn't narrowly focused on this group of kids and on emergent literacy specifically applicable across a broader range? So we had a survey we sent out to about 60 teachers and heard back from 54, 6 different states, like multiple different LEAs within those states, and then did observations in 5 different classrooms across grade bands. And some people will say, well, why were you looking at emergent literacy still in high school, right? we should be shifting. And as the research shows, it's not possible for the foundation to have been laid with the instruction that we're giving in elementary and middle school to expect that you would even make that shift. And so that was one of the reasons why we're looking at emergent literacy across those entire grade bands, because we can't assume that students should be moving on.
Well, just the fact that you got 50, but just the fact that you got 54 out of 60, that response rate is so eye-opening, I feel like, to anybody who's looking at it, because that means that they have reflected value in it already, saying, I need more. There's something missing here. I want to do more, do better, know more, know how to do this.
Yeah. And there aren't any studies like that right now in this area of the field that have that many voices represented.
Yeah. So if for people that aren't in the research field, just, knowing what I know, a 20% response rate is like considered good, 20 to 30% response rate. So the fact that you guys had like 80 to 90% response rate is really meaningful. So let's keep going. So what did you guys find? You did the survey, and then you kind of jumped into the classrooms.
And so the survey asked about those emergent literacy routines that, areas of instruction. So shared reading, independent reading, reading instruction, writing, phonological awareness, alphabet instruction. And it was a series of I statements. So I teach this, I do that. We write with my students. And so teachers were asked to say yes or no. And then if they said yes, they were asked, okay, is this something you do weekly, daily? Like, how often are you doing this? Knowing that when we talk about comprehensive instruction, we are really talking about doing these things daily or as close to daily as we can get. So we were trying to look at not just are we doing these practices, but kind of how often, and then comparing that to what I was observing in classrooms. And so what we found is one of the most interesting findings is that teachers are spending more time teaching, right? In the early 90s, we saw that it was less than 30 minutes a day was dedicated to any sort of literacy instruction. And these teachers are reporting an hour to 2 hours of instruction overwhelmingly. And that is what I was also seeing in the classroom. So that's really exciting. We can make inferences that maybe it's a reaction to legislation, but also just this growing interest and understanding. If reading aloud.
If someone were to kind of like look into, and you did a really great job, and we'll make sure to put the link to your dissertation in the show notes, because I do think if somebody wants to dive further, there's no way to kind of incorporate all of this in 30 minutes. But I think that talking about the legislation is important, and you do a really nice job of that in that paper. So could you kind of, if someone was like, well, what does it say? What does federal legislation say?
Yeah. So really ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, is what pushes the legislation further than what we'd had before, to truly say that all students, regardless of ability, need comprehensive literacy education, where that means multi-component instruction, where we are doing these things really every day. And there's some pushback about that in the field. Is that what the law says? And if you read it closely, that's how comprehensive is defined. And other things to think about when we're thinking about this population is also ADA, right? It's not a law or a set of legislation that we think necessarily applies to education, but it is part of why AAC is a right and a support that students need to be getting. The other one that's always doesn't tickle me, I guess, in a good way, but that Andrew F. versus Douglas County in 2017, because I was working in that area at the time. And that one's really important because the Supreme Court unanimously said that this de minimis is not acceptable. Where de minimis means, I wrote it down, right? Trivial. That you're saying before that it was acceptable to make just above trivial progress. Like, that's so insulting and so frustrating. And so it's really helpful to have the quote is that every child should have the chance to meet challenging objectives. And so obviously policy and changes, we still need to be the ones that enact them. And so just saying that doesn't mean that things change, but it's nice to have that like guiding lighthouse to say, we can't be doing trivial things and marking it on an IEP as progress. We need to be really teaching kids and students.
Yeah, it goes back to that foundation of your mindset shift, right? If it says that you can, if that's allowable and acceptable, then like, okay, yeah, I'm getting by, I'm doing what I need to do. But if we're
Yeah.
really, if the foundation is no, everyone deserves access to comprehensive literacy instruction, that is our
Yeah.
guiding
And then I'm
light.
a big proponent. I see people, people ask questions on like a Facebook group, and people's responses might be, well, it's the law. It's like, okay, I love these legislations. I'm here for it. And we need to be doing things to support people, right? It doesn't matter if the law says I have to give you AT if there's no funding for people to get it, right? And so you're stuck as an AT specialist, and you're like, yeah, no, I want to get these things, but if there's not funding. And so really taking a both and approach, right? Okay, this is the law. Teachers especially get lots of education in that, but then how do we support you in doing instruction that leads to complying with the law?
Yeah. And I think we've talked about this on the podcast before, but just going back to that participation model, maybe, when we think about the administrative side of things and the law kind of falls into that boat, but yeah, there's still the funding, there's still the mindset, there's still the opportunities that we have to embed. There's so much more than just that one strand. So what did you find from your research, Sophia? Like, what did literacy look like?
Yeah, it looks a lot like reading aloud to students, in not necessarily that interactive way that helps to develop. Most of what shared reading does is develops expressive communication. And that's most of the things that we study too in our research when you do reviews of the literature. And the biggest finding was this discrepancy in experience, right? So teachers, when I first looked at the survey data versus my observations, I was like, what's going on? Teachers are reporting much higher numbers of daily instruction than I was seeing. And as I analyzed the data together, started to become clear, okay, yeah, teachers are reading multiple times a day to their students. They are doing some of these routines multiple times a day because they're doing one-on-one instruction with multiple students. So maybe they're doing storybook reading with one student, pulling them back to their desk, and they might do that 2 or 3 times across the day. So the teacher's getting multiple opportunities to do it, but any one student might only be getting one opportunity a day, or depending on how many students are in that classroom, they might, it might be tomorrow. So it's every other day. Or a teacher might be providing an hour of literacy instruction, but they're doing a rotation. So every student maybe gets 15 minutes, right? Where you're dividing that hour by how many students you have. And so that was an interesting finding, so that we can start thinking about, yay, teachers have more time. How do I help you maximize it so that it's not only you spending an hour, 90 minutes, or 2 hours, but your students are getting that instructional time too? And then how do we help you make those storybook readings, maximize them so that students really are getting that expressive communication, and that they can maybe be learning about the print? How can we incorporate other routines like teaching writing, teaching alphabet knowledge, where alphabet knowledge includes the sounds, because most of the, I wrote this down, only 23% of teachers reported teaching letter sounds, and of those, only 15% reported doing it at least daily. So that's not enough. You cannot become a reader if you don't know the sounds that the letters represent. Yeah, and then there's almost no writing happening, right? Most of the writing happening is coloring, tracing, and copying letters. Only 12% of teachers are at least one time a week giving you a topic to write on, or having you choose a topic of your choice to write about. So we really got to be helping teachers think about, if we are going to do any rotation, what are the literacy things that students can be happening when they're not with me? How can I do some more small group instruction? And how can I bring in these practices that will help you learn literacy that shared reading can't do on its own?
Yeah, it's very splintered. It's like, how do you make it more, like we have implicit and explicit instruction. So how can we embed that throughout the day and not reinvent the wheel is kind of what I hear you saying. Is that fair?
Yeah, and there are some areas, right, where we know that students benefit from explicit instruction, but then how do we really quickly, another finding that is really important to me is this focus on form over function, right? Form is easier to measure, and it's easier to document, it's easier to see, right? So having you write your letters the right size, that was a big thing, right? So I'm gonna have you copy these letters down, but at the end of the page, your N got too big, so let's write it again smaller. Like, that's not really teaching you about why you would ever write this word, right? But it's comfortable and easy for us, and fits into what we're taught about how to write IEP goals, for instance. So
isn't that just true with AAC
yeah,
in general too? Like I'm just sitting here thinking of the parallels, right? We write often goals for AAC use for that are easy for us, right? And sometimes it's even really we see like a receptive ID with a device, and
yeah,
like making that jump as a communication partner. What do they really need? It's not about us; it's about
exactly.
them.
Right. So identifying, I don't know, symbols out of a field of whatever, being able to identify 5 symbols in this context is easier to document than communicating for different purposes. And then I don't know how many opportunities you had to refuse. And I hope that we're not doing things anymore like, for lack of a better word, torturing you, right? Like
Yeah,
doing things to
compliance
annoy you
based.
on,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
or getting you to request because I put your favorite thing in a container that's really hard to open. But again, those are things that make it easier. I know I did that 5 times.
Yep.
And so that's another whole thing, is rethinking how are we writing goals on IEPs so that we can simultaneously measure the outcome of our instruction, and also feel confident that our instruction doesn't have to be the test that we create for the IEP goal, right? So if I do want to see, can you identify this many vocabulary words? That doesn't mean that every day we sit down and have you point to vocabulary words, right? Those are, one is measurement, one is instruction.
Oh, I really like how you said that. Yeah, one is measurement versus one is instruction, and like you need both. We know we need both to progress monitor and take data, but we also need that time for them to be able to absorb it and see the meaning behind it in different ways. So if a team is really focused on the explicit instruction side of it, or they feel like, okay, I'm trying, but I'm maybe in closer to those percentages, like I'm not doing it every day and it's very splintered and isolated, what would you say? What's the best way to start making that shift? What did you talk to your teams in the study about? What does that look like?
Yeah. So one thing that was really important was we had this coaching model, and we found that schools that had like a champion, right? The person and the person that's going to rally around it, whether that's the paraprofessional in the classroom, the coach at the school level, a coach at an LEA level, that really helps. And I know that can be hard to identify, right, as a team together. And to say, you can't say you weren't going to be the cheerleader. So I understand that can be a hard thing to maybe say implement that, but that is really important. So having that excitement, someone to share wins, someone to model that a win can be a little thing. The other thing that's important is not thinking that tomorrow you need to do all 5 routines, because if you haven't been doing them, that's going to be really overwhelming, right? And you're going to be the one overwhelmed, right? It's easy to think that the students are. It's normally us. And so choosing one routine. Okay, I actually do shared reading a lot. Okay, I'm going to look at Tar Heel Shared Reader. I'm going to look at Project Core. I'm going to read Comprehensive Literacy for All. And I'm going to think about, how do I maximize this routine? Am I going to do it in small groups? What else am I going to embed? Okay, I'm feeling comfortable with that. Now I want to include opportunities for writing, right? So like building this out slowly and feeling confident that over time you can be changing your schedule so that you can incorporate more. And that's a whole nother thing, right? Thinking through our schedule and what is adding to the classroom and what's adding instructional value, and what maybe could we drop, shorten, augment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or just
right?
shift. Yeah, absolutely. And we have talked about all of these areas before on the podcast, and we are going to dive deeper into them throughout this season. But if someone is like, what are the 5 things I should be doing? What are those 5 areas? Can you just like the resources you mentioned, Tar Heel Shared Reader, Project Core, those are the go-to, like if you know nothing and you want to start right now, like go there, go to Project Core, because it's got the modules, it's got the supportive learning, it's got additional links and resources. But if someone's like, what 5, what's that? What are those?
Yeah. And so if you aren't familiar, going to Project Core and looking at the emergent literacy instructional routines and not necessarily thinking about them through a core lens, like those are great routines to start with. We just happened to do them through this core lens. So having opportunities to do shared reading, where shared reading means we're going to make meaning around the text and have this rich engagement. Having independent opportunities to write, where writing might mean just playing around with pencils. And part of that means setting up your classroom so that students can have independent access to those things. Having opportunities to learn about letters and letter sounds and letter names. Having opportunities, what am I missing? Yeah, to have those shared experiences and independent experiences to explore. Another really important one is independent reading opportunities. There's a lot of research now that shows that helps bridge. That is one of the things that helps kids to integrate. So if we are teaching in these isolated ways, it feels counterintuitive. Oh, I don't know if the student is reading, but it just does give them that opportunity to integrate the things that they're learning. Some new interesting research came out too that demonstrated, for typically developing kids at least, independent reading time from 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds moderated vocabulary instruction much later. So just knowing that it can, there's many people that are saying we shouldn't be spending time in classrooms doing that. It doesn't support and drive gains, but that's just not what the research is showing. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty easy thing to embed in your day, right? That's not, I don't want to say there's nothing to teach there, right? But it's just finding ways to get your hands on books and not worrying about it being at the right level, right? Mm-hmm. It can be any book that the student's interested in.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have a lot of tools that we'll talk about this season and ones that you may already be familiar with that allow for that independent reading and show them that they're a reader. I think that mindset shift too is so important, that you are a reader. It's not that you get read to and you get to listen, like you are a reader from when you were born. I just saw a graphic too that said, if you read 5 books a day, by the time you're in kindergarten, you have access to 5 million more words than if you don't have access to that literacy opportunity.
Which is why shared reading is right. It's so funny because we don't think of it as an oral language task, but it is. It barely teaches you how to read, right? Unless we do these things to draw your attention to the print. Most kids don't even realize that it's a print-based activity. What you're doing is exposing them to many, many more words, right? It's the double-edged sword. We know we have core vocabulary. We use this small set of words for 80% of what we say, but we want you to know many, many, many more concepts as well. We measure vocabulary, but you get that through these shared reading experiences where we talk about things I would just never say in my daily life.
Right. And it's naturally embedding structure too into these opportunities where they can see context, and they can see repeated lines and or rhyming and just these opportunities that we may not see in natural conversational exchanges. So
absolutely.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about pitfalls that you saw in the research in the classroom. Are there any other ones that you would want to kind of caution people against? Like, make sure you're kind of avoiding this.
Yeah. I think we might have and this is just my guess, a misunderstanding of what mistaking one-on-one instruction as being individualized. Right? Because I saw a lot of the exact same instruction across the entire classroom happening one at a time. And so I know and want to validate that group instruction can be very challenging, right? It's easier to gain your intention one-on-one and to keep things focused. And so that's another thing of like, you have to have a little faith and be confident that even though it feels messy in a smaller group or a whole group, that you can still have instruction that's meaningful. And so that's a shift that I'm really interested in, is how do we support people in doing it in a way that supports learning, but then also in having that faith is like the only word I can come up with. Like that was my experience with doing things that I'd read about, right? Karen teaching alternate pencils and the independent writing was one where I was like, this is going to look wild. And I'm in your house and parents watching me and it's going to look like we're doing nothing, but I need to have some faith in this theory that it'll work. And then it did, but it was really scary at first. And so I want to acknowledge that but we need to reconceptualize and separate those two things, that one-on-one isn't individualized. And then getting away from this focus on form and really focusing on why would I ever want to read and write. Because again, the research shows that when students show up to school and they don't have that strong form, so form being like how are letters shaped, letter sound correspondence, all of those things, that then teaching them about the why, the function, actually brings those in faster than focusing just on teaching the skills. And then students that do have a strong foundation benefit either way. They benefit whether we focus on the why or the how. And so it helps everyone to be focusing on, I might write a list because I want to tell you what to get me at the store, right? So like thinking about that play that people do in preschool and kindergarten where there's pencils around, so I'm going to pretend to be school, or I'm going to pretend to be your waiter, right? You come, go to mom in bed. Oh, I'll take your order today, right? They might scribble something down, but they're starting to understand reasons why I might communicate through this medium. And then that helps with the motivation of, okay, writing, I don't want to say better, but write more conventionally.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, these are things that I think people get hung up on the mode sometimes, like you mentioned, just with the physical pencil, but we know that using AAC can be a form of alternative pencils as well, right?
Yeah.
So we talk about, okay, well, if you're at school or you're working on writing lists, well, then maybe we encourage parents to create a list to go shopping or ordering from a menu at the restaurant, right? There's lots of carryover opportunities.
Watching me write, having these authentic opportunities to see, I know I keep it researched, but there's a study I'd like to redo from the 80s that was looking at what are the opportunities to see literacy in your home. And at that point, it was like 14% is literacy for literacy's sake, is what they said. So reading for pleasure is what they meant. The other thing was paying bills, looking up what time the TV show was going to play, reading the bus schedule, all those things that you would observe that I do wonder about, that we don't observe our family members doing anymore because we're on screens that are private. Mm-hmm. So even if I wasn't seeing the text of you reading the newspaper or the text of the recipe necessarily, I was seeing that you're using print in these ways that isn't as obvious now. So I do wonder about that, just generally.
Are you, a little side question, but are you a proponent of closed captioning, then turning that on when there is screen time available?
I don't see why not. I mean, the thing that we know is that kids, even typically developing, don't attend to most print unless we do something to draw their attention to it. So I would still want us to be interacting around it, but it certainly isn't hurtful. Yeah. And especially, if we don't know of hearing loss, or there's all sorts of reasons why not. It's not going to hurt.
Yeah, but we're not and we've talked about this in the past too, but we're not including like symbolising text. We're just talking about turning on closed captioning if you have somebody, because we know symbolising text is not something that we would see. That would be a pitfall.
We don't need to turn your podcast into a 3-hour. If you pull that cord on the back of my doll back, we will go down a path.
Yeah. So don't symbolate, pitfall. Please don't symbolate. But closed captioning, if you do see some screen time, if you're like, what's a quick way for me to give them some more opportunities? Maybe that's a good
Which is a pitfall we see in like a difference too. Wasn't seeing any symbolating in elementary school and saw this shift in high school to it being there. And I think it is this, you don't have the foundational skills to be reading, and this makes it look like you were understanding what was happening. So it makes it look like we bypassed the text to help you. But I always say, if reading pictures was easier, we would all read pictures. Like, why would it be easier for someone with a significant cognitive disability, but not easier for me? Yeah. Like, it doesn't theoretically make a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good way to explain it.
And then one other pitfall that I keep not talking about is this discrepancy between what teachers reported in terms of AAC access versus what we were seeing. And we see this in many surveys. Like, there was a big DLM survey where if you ask teachers what mode, do they use speech or not? We find that teachers will say, oh yeah, they're a speaker. And they have like 3 or 4 words that they're saying, right? And or 3 or 4 phrases. And it's like, okay, well, speech isn't meeting their communication needs. And so similarly, because someone got you a device once, or there's an app they recommended, that doesn't mean that you have access to an AAC device, right? So seeing things like there's a classroom poster, but it's on the back wall where a door to the bathroom is almost always open. Oh, and also you're not allowed to leave your chair ever. So it's like, okay, right? Or you have the iPad with the one app and you only get to use it to order your lunch option, and then it literally gets locked away back on the charging dock. And so helping teachers too, and I know that we all have had this and it can feel like a battle. And so I'd like to shift that feeling and tension, but how do I support you in realizing that someone just getting it through the AT department isn't the same as having access to an AAC device, and how do I support you in embedding it, right? So another baby step, getting back to the how do I do this in my classroom and not feeling like I have to do everything at once.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got the theory, we've got the practical application. Is there any physical, environmental, classroom shifts that you'd kind of mentioned it a little bit in talking about a center, but is there anything that you would say yeah, here's a physical thing you could do to your classroom to kind of make it more friendly for literacy and AAC?
Yeah. I mean, finding ways to have more materials out and about that students can access. So whether it is having independent access to their device, having writing tools all around the room where we're not saying, oh, we use pencils for tracing and we use crayons for coloring. Let them explore and feel safe that things are all around. And so if that means that you don't want really pointy pencils, figure out a way to have them have safer, not right, there are ways around this, and not feeling like we have to control everything. Another thing was so few classrooms have libraries, right? And this gets back to funding. I know it's hard, teachers have to buy their own books, but just trying to find ways that we have these materials and that we allow the opportunities for students to independently explore, right? So if you are going to do centers, can one of the centers be a pile of books, or can it be going to the library? Does it always have to be sitting at a desk one-on-one with a paraprofessional? And then thinking through, how do I shift the way my classroom is set up so we can be doing more group learning together, right?
If you have those centers, then adding them to the devices too, so that we're not the ones leading that instruction. They have some buy-in and some choice with that too. And I will say, just a plug to everybody for the IRC, physical limitations is not a reason not to give someone, we've talked about this with Kelly Fauner and a few other episodes, but physical limitations is not a reason not to have these opportunities and alternative pencils. So switch accessible, drawing, writing, we've got all of that in our instructional resource center for you guys to check out. And you can always reach out to one of your facilitators and we will help guide you through what might be the best access point for that student. But the physical limitations or difficulties they might have should not be a reason to not have these materials or centers available.
And remembering that the first time we introduce it, kids aren't gonna, right? We have this beautiful video of the first time we did an e-trans board kind of thing with a student, and he's kind of looking around because he's just looking around what do you want me to do? And so if he just looked somewhere twice, then we were saying B. And at one point, he kind of looks up and looks over at the person recording, what? Because he's laying right on his stomach. Just, what are you freaking, he doesn't know. But through these associations, over time, it's going to be, oh, okay, you're doing this, right? So especially with any sort of alternate pencil that's maybe a chart, they're, what? They might not know that they selected a D, but we're going to do that instruction over time. So then not worrying for our IEP goal, oh my gosh, I have to report this week that they didn't know what a D was when they were selected. Okay, of course they didn't.
Right. It's about exposure and natural learning through context. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then the more you do it, like you said, having that daily structure allows them to then stop focusing on, well, what am I actually doing? And then start focusing on the content that's being shared.
Yeah. And we recently had a paper published at the end of last year looking at 2 years of Project Core data, and in this case, expressive communication, and looking at growth. And I'll tell you, teachers were doing their best job implementing, right? And it wasn't always perfect, and it was messy, and we were building and we were supporting. It was in one of the building phases of the 2 years, and we still saw growth, right? It wasn't perfect instruction, but that's fine. Like we're not going to be perfect right away. And we need to keep going and again, have the faith that even imperfect instruction is going to lead to gains, and we'll just get better and better as we keep trying ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, totally agree. I think I read something at one point about 3 years. Any kind of bigger scope project that you're going to implement, first 2 years are going to be incredibly messy. You would not expect to see consistent gains until your third year. And that's kind of how you shift out what.
But we saw significant gains every year, and we didn't see loss over the summer. We didn't see any differences based upon if you were in a life skills classroom or right, like the different types, that didn't make any difference. What your eligibility category was didn't make a difference, because we looked at kids that are all entering with the same communication profile. So just like it's helping everyone.
The big goal. I love it. Okay. So we talked a lot about Project Core today, but I know, and we've talked that there's some new projects coming up for UNC. What are some of the things that we're going to see from you guys in the future that you can share?
I can definitely share a little bit. It's been a little, I'm not currently funded on one of the literacy-based projects, which is hard for me, but I try to keep my finger on the pulse of Building Bridges is this new project that literally builds off Project Core. So, okay, we have these kids that are those cusp kids between emergent and conventional literacy, and how do we push you over the bridge? And so, and also how do we support teachers in these mixed classrooms, right? Where I have students at different levels, so that if we still need to be working on alphabet knowledge, but then I have students that are ready for more advanced phonological awareness, spelling, right, making words. How do I help shift both groups? How do I do shared reading, but also teaching reading for the purpose of actually comprehending text? And so that one's really exciting. I know that they are actually, as we speak, out there furiously printing out materials. There are some really cool packets and cycles that I think people will like, that are much more explicit than maybe Project Core was, right? So this is cycles. This is the book we're reading this week. These are the vocabulary lessons. These are the making word study lessons that we're going to do. Here's some ideas for guided reading, right? So much more, I don't want to say prescriptive, but explicit in terms of how are you going to use this text 5 times across the week? What are you moving on to next week? And hopefully getting teachers to the point too where, okay, you have these 10 books and lessons that we've helped. How do you now start thinking about building out your own in the future? So that's really exciting. Building Bridges, I think there's a .com is the website. I know things aren't posted yet, but like hopefully soon they start getting posted, because that's just gonna be a really awesome resource.
Absolutely. And then could you share what you are working on? Because that was also really exciting when I discovered it. And then you were sharing, we're working on it.
This project is really cool, but it's more AAC focused. And so we are looking at adults in this case, and on our site, we're partnering with University at Buffalo, but looking at adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities and watching them interact with communication partners, videoing it, and looking at where is the AAC device actually introducing problems, or where is it not supporting the way it could be. At the same time, building out this open source free software platform where we're able to design, we don't want to oversell it, but almost anything at this point. Just yesterday, we wrote in a bit of code that lets you use the front facing camera as a mouse, right? Yeah, it worked awesome. And so we can do things for research development user interface that you just can't do on a commercially available product, because you can use the access methods that Toby or PRC or whomever gives you, but you can't then make novel ones. So I could, make the cursor a star. I could make it grow and shrink in different, right? Like I can have different dwell times on different parts of the screen. I'm trying that out with a user who access is really hard. And so it's important for him to be able to clear it all. Mm-hmm. But then it has a hard time sustaining the dwell. So we made it so that you have to dwell longer on the words, but it's like less than half of a second unclear. So you just get it.
That's
right.
Awesome.
So I don't know all the things we'll do with that. We're doing our first user testing actually in the last 2 weeks. So going out to someone's house and saying, okay, I think this might be a solution. What do you think? Can we try it? What are all the glitches we've run into? So we're really excited about that and trying to figure out the story of how do we get the community to also tell us, like, what are your fantasies, right? When you're working with someone, what's the thing that pops into your head that, like, it would be really great if, and then you don't have to be a computer scientist to program things, but you also don't even need to be a designer. Like, we're talking about having a submission portal on our website where, like, send us an idea, draw it out, write it out, and then we can be collaborating together. Because I don't know everything we might want to do, but this is a really powerful tool for us to start designing things that might shake up the field.
Yeah, well, and it's really the direction I think a lot of us feel like the field needs to go in. We need to be listening to the users themselves and stop listening to the communication partners. Like, we need their voices amplified. And so whether it be through impact voices, through research studies like this, it's something that I hope that the more we do literacy instruction and the more we give them autonomous communication, that the more we can sit back on the side.
Like, and part of our goal is this contextualized assessment, for lack of a better word, of how the interaction is going. So we do a lot of, like, communication isn't independent, it's interdependent. And so there are all sorts of reasons to test your vocabulary, to test your, right? There are, but then, okay, so you know all these words, but how is that working in the interaction? And how are both people contributing? How does it, right? One of the problems when I teach special education teachers how to do the communication matrix, and by this, master students, right? Oh, but what if I go to an IEP meeting and we all found different results? Well, it's highly likely I'm going to talk very different to you today, Laura, than when I walk down the hall and talk to Karen versus when I hang out with my friends, maybe later at the bar, right? Of course. So if you all evaluated my communication in context, it should be different in some ways. And to me, that's a strength. And so now I've wandered off whatever you were asking me, but
well, it just goes back to, the heart that communication is interdependent, and that, we need to continue to give all of our AAC users access to literacy instruction.
Yeah.
You guys are like I feel like you guys are kind of at the cusp of all things that we need to be focusing on at UNC. And so I know you guys are very busy, very busy, and you're just trying to do the most with everything that you have. I feel like, I'm hoping that you guys are growing there, because I feel like there's just so much need. And and so I appreciate you guys doing all the things you're doing. So please pass that message along. I know a lot of us feel that way. I was at ATIA, and the amount of people that were trying to talk to Karen after her presentations just kept growing and growing.
Wild.
Yeah. So I think before we kind of land the plane, I just want to say thank you one more time, because I think what you guys are doing is so, so valuable, and I can't wait to see more of it. What's the best, if someone else wants to kind of follow what you guys are doing and stay on top of these resources, what's the best place they should go?
Yeah. So all of our different projects are listed on the, I think it's resources or research tab on the CLDS website, which I cannot give you the URL off the top of my head. I find it by Googling UNC Med School CLDS. And so there is a comprehensive list there of everything that we are working on, with links out to those projects' various sites. And then I also want to give a pitch for Readtopia Go. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a new extension or complement to Readtopia, because Readtopia wasn't really for emergent literacy learners, right? There are some ways that we've been talking about how you could use it that way. Readtopia Go is for emergent literacy users. And so if you are a classroom that's been using Readtopia and are familiar with it at all, this could be a nice complement for those.
Love it. I don't know if that is one that has been highlighted yet, so I appreciate
it's
that.
It's really new. They just announced it at ATIA. And Allison Dennis, who graduated from the center, and then Maureen Donnelly, who was at Toby Dynavox, but was a student of Karen's way back when. Both have been spearheading that. So it's a really cool project. Just want to give them a shout out.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so before you go, I just want to ask you one last question, which is what I ask everyone who comes on, and that is, if you could give us your favorite AAC moment to date, with anyone. It can be relative to you, but if you have it with an AAC user, we would love to hear that too.
Yeah. I mean, that's a hard question, but as it relates to literacy, and as I think about who, like, that, kind of story about having faith, as I was working with a young girl who had a very had epilepsy. In order to try to solve it, they'd had that corpus callosum severing, right? Really hard access. She had a much stronger hand, and her preference for accessing was to pick up her other hand and drop it, right? So trying to get her access was really, really hard. But we spent a summer, very quickly she learned letter names and sounds, right? So I did the thing where Karen said, here's one way that alternate pencils can look. And we got a big foam blackboard. She had cortical vision impairment, had yellow background, sticky letters, and black text, right? All uppercase letters. And we worked on partner assisted scanning and got to this point in one summer where we were writing books to people, right? And where horses was one of the topics. So we found all these pictures of horses and we took turns back and forth writing. And it became very clear very quickly that she actually was representing letter, initial and final letter sounds. And so that was a kid that helped me to know all means all, right? This is a child that I sat in an IEP meeting, like I said earlier, and then a teacher looked at me in the face and asked me why letters were functional, right? And it just lit a fire into my butt that, like, okay, if you don't believe in this, then we're definitely going to make it happen. And a student that you look at and it's so easy for people to dismiss. And it's, again, like frustrating thinking of, again, similar age peers I keep meeting where it's like the difference in our outcomes is because I didn't look too disabled, for lack of a better word, to learn. And that's frustrating. So that's one of many favorite stories.
Oh, I love it. And again, you changed her life. You changed the trajectory of her life by giving her access to literacy, likely because without you in her corner, she may have only had this.
Except for that, I appreciate that and I would hope that, but I don't know. It's not apparent to me that anyone carried it on, right? So we had this like great last 18 months before I moved here, but without someone consistently continuing to give you access, it doesn't matter, right? She can't independently get up and walk over and find a keyboard in her house. And so it's not apparent to me that that is actually something she still has access to. Just the both and struggle, right, of leaving the field, of like, okay, I want to impact many more, but then sometimes being like, okay, but those 30, like if I could stay there longer, because I had clients that I was seeing twice a week for 3 years, right, in their homes. And so that's a whole other story of like where you want to be making a change.
Yeah, well, agreed in the sense that I think over time, you're feeling like you've abandoned that one situation, but you are making a difference. Like we're seeing it in classrooms, and that's the purpose of having an entire season dedicated to literacy and AAC is because we need to be doing more. So, what a good take home message. We'll just stop right there because I feel like I think that we've given the resources for people to explore, to get started. I think you did a great job of just inspiring people. I know that you guys and your work, it kind of gives that implicit and explicit instruction, right? Like there's the meaning behind it of why are we doing this? And then you guys do a good job of saying, okay, here's how you start. Here's how you get started. So check out the resources in the show notes. We just want to thank Sofia for coming on today and kind of giving us the latest, the reasons why, everything that UNC is doing and leading the field. And if someone has a specific question, is there a good contact for you or someone there to reach out to?
Yeah, my email is, which you can probably post in the notes somewhere, sofiabg@med.unc.edu. They're long addresses.
Yeah, perfect. We'll put that in the show notes. Okay, for Innovative AAC Solutions, I'm Laura Hayes. We just want to thank Sofia Benson-Goldberg for coming on again to talk all things literacy. Guys, take care.